On a quiet October afternoon in 2005, a tragic accident shattered the lives of everyone involved. 14-month-old Kyle Lazarchik was found unresponsive in his home, his tiny body marked with mysterious injuries. The young nanny, Ada Quadros, frantically dialed 911, but what happened next would change her life forever. As paramedics raced to the scene, the grim reality of Kyle's condition became evident. Despite Ada's desperate attempts to save him, the baby's injuries were severe. But what could have caused such a tragedy? The answers seemed elusive. Ada Quadros was born on September 13, 1977, in the coastal town of Chimbote, Peru. She was the first child of Victor Quadros, a veterinarian, and Luz Fernandez, a teacher. Ada was the eldest of 4 siblings and consistently excelled academically, even winning knowledge contests. She had a happy childhood filled with dreams of self-improvement. Ada later recounted that she spent much of her childhood with one of her sisters on their grandparents' farm, enjoying the close connection with nature and animals. This period was one of the happiest times of her life. Although Ada's family wasn't poor, they were not wealthy either. During her teenage years, she looked for ways to contribute financially. Together with her sister and a friend, she formed a group to entertain at children's parties. After high school, Ada enrolled in a private university to study law. Unfortunately, her financial situation did not allow her to continue, and she had to drop out. Despite this setback, Ada was determined to succeed and support her family. With this goal in mind, she applied for a U.S. visa through the lottery program. Like many young people from Peru and other Latin American countries, Ada saw the United States as a land of opportunities. She was determined to move there, work hard, earn a better income, and pave the way for a brighter future for herself and her family. Her family was thrilled for her. They sold some belongings and did everything possible to gather enough money for her journey. Her destination was Texas, where she initially planned to stay with some relatives. In early 2004, she began working as a waitress in a restaurant. After some time, she joined a company that placed nannies in households. This is how she met the Lazarchik family. The Lazarchik family consisted of Father Michael, commonly known as Mike, Mother Renee, their eldest daughter Alyssa, and twin boys Ryan and Kyle. Little is known about the family's background except that they married in 2000. Shortly after their wedding, Renee became pregnant with their first daughter, Alyssa. Just 4 months after Alyssa's birth, Renee was expecting again, this time with twins Kyle and Ryan. The Lazarchik couple wanted to hire a trustworthy nanny to take care of the twins when Renee returned to work. Alyssa was already comfortable in a daycare she attended daily, where she had made several friends, so they decided she would continue going there. The couple interviewed several candidates, and Ada stood out as the best option. At 27 years old, she was young but not a teenager. She appeared healthy, strong, well-mannered, and cheerful. Renee wanted Ada to start immediately so she could spend a few weeks with her, explaining the household routines, where things were, and what was expected of her. She also wanted to observe how Ada handled the young twins, who were just over a year old. The family had one specific request. They needed assurance that Ada could commit to staying with them for 18 months, and Ada committed to this arrangement. Initially, it was agreed that she would only spend the day at the Lazarchik household, but after some time, they asked her to live in, and Ada agreed. From then on, she only left on weekends to stay at her uncle's house. Everything seemed to go smoothly. The Lazarchik family was pleased with Ada's work and grew fond of her, trusting her completely. Numerous photos captured happy moments with the smiling young nanny holding the twins. However, everything changed in the summer of 2005. Ada informed the Lazarchik family that her uncles were returning to Peru before moving on to Germany. Ada was prepared to go with them and had already purchased her plane ticket for October 29th of that year. Understandably, this was disappointing news for the couple since it was not what they had agreed upon. Eventually, they understood and only asked Ada to stay until they could find a replacement. They even requested her help in searching for and selecting her successor. Ada agreed, but from that point on, she no longer stayed overnight at the Lazarchik home. Instead, she returned to her uncle's house each night and came back early in the morning. Given the change in circumstances and Ada's impending departure, the Lazarchik family scheduled interviews with several nanny candidates for Wednesday, October 12th. During the day, Renee called Ada and asked her to prepare macaroni and cheese for the children. Ada complied and fed the kids. When Renee returned home, she greeted her children, saw they were well, and after interviewing the candidates, spent over an hour with her little ones before they went to bed. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. However, at 5 a.m. on Thursday, October 13th, Kyle woke up crying, which was unusual. The twins were typically heavy sleepers and never woke up on their own. It always took someone to wake them. Nonetheless, Renee got up, went to the twins' room, picked up Kyle, and soothed him until he fell back asleep. She then returned to bed. 2 hours later, at 7:30, Mike went to the children's room, woke them up, hugged and kissed them, and left them in Ada's care before heading to work. Renee woke up just before 9:30 and spent some time with the twins. She changed Ryan's diaper, said goodbye to both him and Kyle, and left for work. The children were fine, with nothing out of the ordinary except Kyle's early wake-up. That day, their older sister Alyssa went to daycare as usual. But things took a dramatic turn around 1 p.m. when Ada called 911, highly agitated, saying that one of the children, Kyle, had stopped breathing and was turning blue. After providing the address, the operator gave Ada instructions to perform CPR on the child. Ada followed the instructions while paramedics were on their way. A few minutes later, they arrived at the house and took over Kyle's care. They asked Ada what had happened, and she, very distressed, explained that after lunch, she had put Kyle in his crib and returned to get his brother. But when she got back with Ryan, Kyle started vomiting and stopped breathing. While paramedics attended to Kyle, Ada called Renee to inform her of the situation, giving her a different version of events. She said that after feeding the children, she took Kyle out of his high chair and, as usual, placed him on the playroom floor while she fetched his brother. But when she returned, Kyle was vomiting. She went to the kitchen to get a bowl to catch the vomit, and when she returned, Kyle had fallen. She said she picked him up, took him to the sink, and performed the maneuver Renee had taught her in case one of the children stopped breathing. But it didn't work, and she also attempted CPR. After initial treatment, the paramedics transported Kyle to the nearest hospital. When Renee arrived at the house, the ambulance with her son had already left, but the police were still at the scene. Renee took Ryan, the other twin, and asked Ada to accompany them. They followed the police, who escorted them to the hospital. During the drive, Renee called her husband and they met at the medical center. A few minutes later, the doctors decided to transfer Kyle by helicopter to the Dallas Children's Hospital. The Lazarchiks returned home, left Ada to care for Ryan, and headed to the Dallas Children's Hospital. Ada asked them to keep her informed about Kyle's condition. On the way to the hospital, Renee started worrying that Ada might be too nervous to look after Ryan properly, so she called a friend to assist the nanny at the house. Shortly after, her friend arrived at the house. Ada, visibly distressed and crying, opened the door for her. She asked Ada to explain what had happened. According to her account, Ada said that Kyle was standing between the playroom and the kitchen when he suddenly collapsed. Ada claimed she dropped a plate she was holding, picked Kyle up, took him to the living room, and performed CPR on him. She recalled Ada mentioning that Kyle's brain hadn't fully developed and that this issue had started at birth. She didn't fully understand, but Ada kept talking, saying she loved Kyle and would never hurt him. She tried to calm the very upset nanny, reassuring her that she hadn't done anything wrong and that she was a good person. Meanwhile, at the Dallas Children's Hospital, the Lazarchik family received devastating news. The doctor in charge of Kyle reported that the child had suffered severe head injuries, with multiple bruises on his head, arm, and left shoulder. A neurosurgeon met with the distressed parents to explain that something had to be done to relieve the pressure on Kyle's brain, though survival was unlikely. A child abuse specialist who also met with Mike and Renee suggested that Kyle's injuries could be consistent with abuse. The specialist stated that Kyle's injuries were so severe, it was as if he had been in a car accident or fallen from a sixth floor. Initially, Renee couldn't believe it. She thought Ada might have accidentally dropped the child or was too scared or ashamed to admit it. But the doctors clearly explained the extent of Kyle's head injuries and the force required to cause them. With this information, the possibility of an accident seemed implausible. Renee immediately called another friend to pick up Ryan and take him away from the house. While this was happening at the hospital, Ada became increasingly anxious at home. Renee's friend had to leave to pick up her son from school and take him home. During her absence, Ada called her several times, asking if there was any news about Kyle. When Renee's friend returned to the house, she found Ada calm. Ada was no longer crying or talking. Shortly after, a police car drove by the house. Upon seeing it, Ada lost her composure. She began crying uncontrollably and shouting, "No, no, no!" She collapsed to the floor behind a door, repeatedly insisting she would never harm Kyle. Two female detectives arrived to interview Ada as the person who had called 911 about the injured child. She had been the only adult present when the incident occurred. As the detectives located the house and got out of their patrol car, they heard Ada's cries. Upon entering, they found her extremely agitated. When Ada was able to speak, she explained that she had taken Kyle out of his high chair and placed him on the playroom floor. She was patting his back to help him burp when he suddenly began to vomit. Ada said she went to the kitchen to get a container to catch the vomit, as Renee disliked stains on the floor. While she was cleaning, Kyle turned blue, fell, and started convulsing. She claimed she took him to the living room, called 911, and followed the dispatcher's instructions. During the interview, the other officer called the hospital to get an update on Kyle's condition. When they discovered the diagnosis, detectives told Ada that her story did not account for the injuries Kyle had. Ada suggested that Kyle might have hit his head when he fell after she left him alone in the playroom. But the officers noted that the playroom floor was covered with soft rugs, making this explanation unlikely. Trying to offer another explanation, Ada said that Kyle might have hit his head on the door frame when she carried him on her hip. At the officer's insistence, Ada demonstrated how Kyle could have been hurt, and mentioned that Mike and Renee often bumped Kyle's head without any problems. The officer checked the spot where Ada claimed Kyle hit his head but found no evidence of a strong impact. When the officers told her that the injury didn't seem severe enough to cause the extensive damage the doctors described, Ada insisted that the impact was strong because she was running with Kyle in her arms. She also stated that she had never shaken or hit either of the twins. The officers urged Ada to tell the truth, as it could save Kyle's life, but Ada provided no further explanation. Given the circumstances, the officers reported the situation to their command and took Ada into preventive custody for further questioning. Meanwhile, crime scene investigation units arrived to examine the house. After completing their task, they informed Renee's friend, who had stayed at the house on behalf of the owners, that they could clean up and organize everything for the family's return. While several friends cleaned the house, they found a piece of adhesive tape sticking out from the door of a cabinet under the kitchen island. When they opened the door, they noticed it was broken and held together by tape. As a result, opening it caused the door to become misaligned. They simply placed it back and secured it with the tape, but found it strange because Renee was always careful with broken items to prevent the children from getting hurt. They had a hunch and called the police to report the door. Shortly after, investigators returned to collect potential evidence. Later, when questioned about the cabinet door, Renee stated that she frequently used that door and had never seen it held with adhesive tape. By Friday, October 14th, all of Mike and Renee's hopes had vanished. The doctors informed them that Kyle was brain dead and had no chance of recovery. Amid indescribable pain, the couple authorized the removal of life support, after which Kyle passed away. 3 days later, on October 17th, the detectives interviewed Ada in prison, where she was accused of premeditated assault on a minor. This time, Ada claimed that the day before the incident, she was preparing the macaroni and cheese that Renee had requested. She had Kyle sitting on the kitchen counter, and the child fell, landing headfirst on the kitchen floor and hitting his head hard. Ada said she picked him up and checked for injuries. The only thing she noticed was redness on his ear and the right side of his head, so she applied cold compresses and gave him a pain reliever. When the interrogators asked why she hadn't told this to the other officers, Ada said she thought they wouldn't believe her. She mentioned that she didn't tell Renee because when she arrived home from work, she complained of a severe headache. Ada said Renee suffered from migraines and had requested that the lights be turned off and the house be kept quiet. The interrogators asked if she had fallen with the child, which she adamantly denied. During that interrogation, Ada learned that Kyle had died, and she cried for the rest of the interview. Ada was brought before the courts, where a judge charged her with aggravated homicide and set bail at $750,000, which was beyond the means of Ada or her family, so she remained in custody until the trial. At that time, the police indicated that she might be charged with premeditated actions, which could carry the death penalty. The case of Kyle's death went to trial in the second half of 2005. The doctor who examined Kyle at Dallas Children's Hospital testified that when he received Kyle, the child was already unconscious. He described multiple hematomas on the right side of Kyle's head, as well as bruises on the left side of his head and shoulder and both arms. Additionally, there were 2 small hemorrhages forming hematomas on the right temple. Kyle had 3 main areas of hematomas on his head, indicating 3 separate impacts. He added that the bruises were relatively recent, one possibly 12 to 16 hours old. Internally, Kyle had brain and retinal bleeding, indicative of severe trauma, even though there were no broken bones. The brain tissue was notably swollen, and the pressure inside Kyle's head was 90 millimeters of mercury, whereas the normal level is 20 millimeters. Based on these findings, he concluded that Kyle had suffered severe traumatic events consistent with blunt force trauma, possibly from someone hitting his head against a hard object. He suggested the type of injuries could result from shaking and swinging a young child's head against a solid object, like a kitchen cabinet door. A Dallas County forensic expert testified that the autopsy revealed multiple, overlapping small hematomas on Kyle's scalp, along with a couple of punctate abrasions on the right temple, separated by over a centimeter. There were also 4 or 5 pairs of similar lesions on his head. His brain showed significant hemorrhage and swelling, with retinal hemorrhages in both eyes, requiring substantial force to cause such injuries. She concluded that the cause of death was severe head injuries from blunt force trauma, agreeing that Kyle's head might have been struck multiple times against the wooden door of the kitchen cabinet. She ruled out the possibility that Kyle had merely bumped into a door frame or fallen from the kitchen counter. Another critical testimony came from a forensic analyst who measured the distance between the fasteners on the broken kitchen cabinet door and found it matched the punctate abrasions on Kyle's head. This expert also analyzed the adhesive tape used to repair the cabinet door and discovered 2 DNA traces, one of which had a much higher contribution and matched Ada's DNA. The lesser trace could not be identified. After hearing from the experts, it was Mike's turn to testify. He stated that Kyle was fine on the night of October 12th and the morning of October 13th with no bruises. He also mentioned that he prepared breakfast that morning, opening and closing the kitchen cabinet doors to get utensils and food, and that all doors were in perfect condition, including the one later found inexplicably repaired with tape. The parents shared that they had breakfast with the children and played with blocks, with the twins crawling around a playhouse. Based on all the evidence, it was easy to conclude that the events leading to Kyle's death occurred when no other adults were in the house except Ada. The case prosecutor stated that the exact circumstances of what happened to Kyle might never be known for sure, but based on the evidence presented at trial, she painted a possible scenario. Perhaps Kyle didn't want to eat his lunch, and Ada, feeling frustrated or distracted by watching a soap opera, might have taken him out of his high chair without noticing the cabinet door was open. The prosecutor speculated that Ada's rage might have triggered the vicious attack on Kyle's head using the cabinet door until it broke, with the door's screws leaving marks on the child. After all the testimonies and closing arguments, the jury went to deliberate. Upon returning, they found Ada Quadros guilty of capital murder of a child under 6 years old. As the verdict was read, Ada's mother, Luz Fernandez, who had traveled from Peru when her daughter was arrested, stood up and shouted that she would free Ada because she was innocent. She proclaimed that there was no evidence to convict her daughter and vowed to start over and appeal. After the jury members left, Kyle's parents showed photographs and videos of their deceased son, recounting his brief 14 months of life from birth to the last photo taken days before his death. Family members spoke about Kyle, while others simply couldn't stop crying. Ada was sentenced the following year in 2006 to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. For Ada and her family, giving up was not an option. Her parents immediately started a campaign to appeal the sentence, arguing that Ada's conviction was based on racial prejudice and ineffective public defense. However, appealing required money for legal representation and process costs, which the family did not have. Undeterred, they sought support from various sources, including the Peruvian government, the Peruvian and Latino communities in the United States, and solidarity organizations in Peru. In prison, Ada maintained her innocence and took every opportunity for interviews to assert it. Their persistence paid off, and in 2009, Ada's legal representation filed an appeal, citing 5 specific errors in the initial trial. After reviewing the case, the appeals court dismissed 3 of the claims but agreed with 2. This was enough for the judges to overturn the conviction and annul the trial due to irregularities. Following this decision, Ada's family began another fundraising effort to cover the $100,000 needed for a new trial. It took another 3 years to prepare for the new trial, which began on July 10, 2012, with the selection of 12 jurors from over 100 candidates. The trial took place in Collin County's Justice Hall. The defense argued that Kyle had fallen from the kitchen counter on October 12th, injuring his head, and the situation worsened the next day when Ada, running with the child in her arms, accidentally struck his head on the doorframe. This time, the defense presented testimony from a forensic expert with 40 years of experience. He suggested that some of Kyle's bruises might have been caused at the hospital during catheter insertion to assess brain swelling. The prosecution fiercely challenged this testimony. David Gardner, an employee of the kitchen cabinet manufacturer, also testified for the defense. He proposed alternative explanations for the broken cabinet door, though he didn't entirely rule out that Kyle's head could have been struck against it. A poignant moment in the trial was Mike's testimony, where he described Kyle's last 2 days connected to numerous tubes and machines, eventually being taken off life support and dying in his parents' arms. The defense argued there wasn't enough evidence to convict Ada, but the prosecution highlighted the medical findings and the numerous times Ada changed her story. After the sessions concluded, the jury deliberated for 5 hours, even requesting to listen to the 911 call recordings again. Ultimately, they once again found Ada Quadros, then 33, guilty of capital murder and sentenced her to life imprisonment without parole. Back in prison, Ada joined the prison volleyball team, learned Braille, and won an art contest with a drawing of the Virgin Mary, which she auctioned to raise funds for a new appeal. Ada, from her cell, maintains her innocence, her spirit unbroken as she and her family continue their fight for an appeal, seeking a chance to prove what they believe to be the truth. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.